Welcome back. In this lecture, we will start with democracy. Right? Democracy as a topic is quite vast. It is quite substantive, and it has a democracy. This word has multiple meanings as well. Right? For Aristotle, there was the democracy was not acceptable. He did not think democracy would be a stable government. For Plato, he did not think democracy was a good government. He suggested philosopher king. Right. So democracy, according to different people, can mean different things. Right. In general, in general, in general, if I have to define democracy, if I have to define democracy, again, my favorite kind of exercise to understand things, etymology. How does democracy word breaks down? It breaks down in two parts. Number one is demos and other is archy. Demos means people and archy means rule. In simple terms, in as basic terms as possible, democracy is basically a form of government. It is a form of government which is which gathers its source of power, which gathers its source of sovereignty from people, right? And even in simpler terms, if I have to define democracy, I will define democracy as rule of people, right? As simple as that. Rule of people, people's rule, democracy, right? But as we know, political science or politics is endless, bottomless, borderless sea. So, as political science is bottomless, borderless sea, democracy, which is a type of politics, which will also have n number of interpretations, right? By the word of it, by the word of it, right? What I said, what is democracy? What is etymology of democracy? It is rule of people, right? Rule of people. Now, if I make a simple table, right? If I make a simple table and say number of people and and type of government, right? So number if ruling number of people is one, can you call it democracy? No, you cannot. It is not rule of people, it is rule of single person. If ruling persons are elected by, if ruling persons are elected by common people and those people are representing those common people, like in India we have around 545 plus 250 members, right? Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha. These people are elected by Indian populace. So we have around, let's say, 800 people to represent the whole India, right? Is this form democracy? Is this form democracy? It might be, it may not be, right? Then let's say all of India, all of India participates in a particular decision, right? All of India participates in particular decision. 1.4 billion people participate in a particular decision. Is it form of democracy? It can be, it cannot be, right? But it is most likely. And if I say, right, if I say 20, how many states we have? 28 states we have. 28 states send 28 of its representative to GST Council They deliberate among themselves about principles of tax devolution. Is it democracy? It can be, it cannot be. Right? So people's rule, people's rule can have and may have multiple interpretation. For for North Korea, they have democracy. They say we have democracy. Right? What is their actual name? People's Republic of Democratic Korea. Right? Republic. People's Republic. Is it Republic? It is not. China. Is China is China a democracy? They say they are a democracy. Are they democracy? Are they democracy? Now I will tell you one thing. Chinese local self-government is stronger than Indian self-government. This is not me saying, this is international research. They have more powers. Chinese local government has more powers. So, so China, China democracy as it has more powers at local level. There is actual functioning elections at local level. Is China democratic? I cannot say. Right? I cannot say with a certain definiteness. Right? I cannot say. So when there are multiple interpretations of democracy, there is no singular meaning behind democracy. What I will say that democracy is a promiscuous term. Democracy is a promiscuous term as explained by Bernard Kirk. Why democracy is a promiscuous term? Because there are multiple models which exist, right? Oh, democracy is a promiscuous term, and there is one more term that we are living in democratic confusion. We are living in democratic confusion. This is also a good keyword to write in exam. This was given by James Madison, right? Why promiscuous term? Why democratic confusion? Because there is not one model with with which we can say with certainty that it is democracy, right? With respect to democracy, with respect to democracy, there are two models, right? In general, democracy can be categorized as this. Democracy, with respect to democracy, there can be a narrow view and there can be a broad view, right? So what does narrow view say? That democracy is just a form of government. Broad view, substantive view says that democracy means liberty. Democracy means autonomy of self. Democracy means individualism. Democracy means rights. Right? So democracy can can be categorized in these two views, narrow view and broad view. Democracy means enfranchisement, right? Enfranchisement means basically right to, right? As we have studied in feminism, suffragette movement, right? Women's movement for right to vote was there. So democracy allows that, right? Democracy has become gender neutral, right? So democracy we must understand. Democracy we must understand through two lenses, right? Democracy we must understand through two lenses. I will continue with narrow view and broad view. Right? I will continue with narrow view and broad view. So I'll start with Western perspective on democracy. I can also categorize it as broad view. Western perspective on democracy. Western perspective on democracy is that it is a broad view. It sees democracy more than form of government, and Western perspective on democracy is of way of life, right? It is their comprehensive doctrine. It is their comprehensive doctrine because on life, Western view on life itself is quite broad. They have autonomy of self. They have dignity principle among them, right? There is Kantian point of view, there is Rawlsian point of view. All is there. So Western perspective on democracy is broad. They see democracy more than a form of government. They see democracy as a way of life. As a way of life. Then we have to see non-Western perspective on democracy. This is narrow view, right? Non-Western developing world sees democracy through a narrow lens. Through a narrow lens, right? They see democracy just as a form of government. They see democracy as just a form of government. Do you think true democracy exists in, let's say, Bangladesh? Does it exist in Pakistan? In Pakistan, there is no democracy. There is no democracy at all. Whoever military wants to choose, whoever ISI wants to choose, that person can become Prime Minister of Pakistan. Nawaz Sharif was under patronage of army, he was Prime Minister. Then Imran Khan came under patronage of party, he was Prime Minister. Then Imran Khan started doing the things for local population, for people of Pakistan, The the army junta or army started attacking Imran Khan, right? So a lot of power is with army in Pakistan. So is Pakistan a true democracy? It is not. It is not. Pakistan is not a true democracy. It cannot be a true democracy, right? So developing world do not see do not see democracy in a broad view. It sees democracy in a very narrow view. In a very narrow view. What is narrow view? What is narrow view? That democracy is just a form of government, right? What is narrow view? Saying that democracy is just just for elections, right? Just for elections. Beyond elections, there is no democracy in Pakistan, in say let's say Bangladesh, in Nepal, and in countries like Nepal, even in African countries. Only in election there is democracy. After election there is no democracy, right? As there are substantive elements of democracy like human dignity, like autonomy of self, right? So we can say that only in India democracy is is relatively successful. It is not fully successful. Why it is not fully successful? it is relatively successful. Why it is relatively successful? Because as we have seen, on an average, twice in a year there is president rule. On an average, at least two times there is the center imposes president rule on some state. Why it is relatively successful? Because there is emergency provision in Indian constitution. Emergency was imposed in 78, 78, no, not in 78, it was removed in 78, but 1971, 1975, 1962, right? Thrice it was imposed. So it is relatively successful because there are elements in Indian constitutions itself which can take away principle of democracy, right? And why it is relatively successful? These were failures. Why it is not successful? Why it is relatively successful? Because in India there are at least there are at least free and fair election, right? In India there is at least free and fair elections, right? Right. So, in third world, democracy is just seen as a form of government. It is seen in a narrow view, but in Western world, it is a autonomy of. It is a broad view. A there is a bigger picture that Western world sees than in non-Western world. So, what we have to see that why in India it is relatively successful, or why it is on decline. We will see when we will see party system in India, when we will see caste in India, then thereby we will realize how money and muscle is used, right? How freedom of speech and expression is curbed, how surveillance power has been increased, right? Recently there was this app called Sanchar Sati app, right? There is general lack of opposition, right? Only singular party wins all the elections. There is an institutional decline. There is an institutional decline, as we have seen from allegations from leader of opposition to to election commission of India. How how it is true, that is another case, right? What those allegations, how those allegations are true, that is another case, but there are allegations, so there is a general institutional decline, right? There is a general institutional decline. This is all alleged. This is all alleged. So as to why Indian democracy is on decline. Indian democracy is on decline, right? As we were seeing how democracy is, what are the perspectives on democracy, how democracy is seen from multiple perspectives. We will also have to see the primary question with respect to democracy, right? Is democracy needed? And if democracy is needed, what are the prerequisites? What are the prerequisites for the success of democratic system? Right. So we will see prerequisites of success of democracy. Or I can frame this same thing in other words. I can say, is constitutionalism necessary for success of democracy? Right. What is constitutionalism? Right. What is constitutionalism? If you have studied in polity, it is good. Otherwise, I will also explain. So, right. Constitutionalism. What is constitutionalism? It is strict adherence strict adherence to articles, and not only articles, but but substantive values of constitution. What are substantive values of constitution? Liberty, equality, fraternity, justice, right? Socialism, secularism, sovereignty, democracy, all these things, right? So, is constitutionalism necessary for success of democracy? Is imbibed constitutionalism necessary for success of democracy? Right? Is there need of people who are constitutional by themselves so that the democracy will succeed? Right? It is the same question. What are prerequisites of for success of democracy, and is constitutionalism needed for success of democracy? Right? So to start, let's treat it as a question. Let's treat it as a question, and I will say I'll start with this quote. I start with this quote, very famous, very famous quote of Winston Churchill. And what Winston Churchill says that democracy is the worst form of government, but it is still the best so long we do not discover something better. Right? What I am trying to answer, what are prerequisites for success of democracy, or is constitutionalism necessary for success of democracy? I am trying to answer this. Let's treat it as a question. I'll start with democracy is the worst form of government, but it is still the best so long we do not discover something. This is the first paragraph. This is the first paragraph, right? Then I will say that there is general decline in democratic there is general decline in democratic values, or democracy as a form of government. Democracy as a form of government, I will substantiate with it with rise of right in Europe and in USA, right? The next paragraph should begin with ancient Greeks view. I'll have to connect this to the next paragraph somehow, right? I will connect this general decline in democracy with saying that this decline is not new, and this decline was seen in Greek time when Socrates had to drink hemlock. As Socrates had to drink hemlock, as Socrates had to drink hemlock, Plato, Plato, Plato developed general hate or dislike towards democracy. Right? To explain this, I will write one quote of Plato, whereby Plato says, Plato says that it is a power by lottery. It is a power by lottery. It is the worst form of government. Right? He says that at least shoemaker need to be trained in shoemaking so that there can be work for him. But in democracy, for administration, you do not need anything. Right? The next paragraph, right? I wrote this shoemaker paragraph. The next paragraph I will write, I'll start with similarly, his disciple and founder of academy, Aristotle. Aristotle observed in his book Polity that democracy is worst form of government. Why democracy is worst form of government? Because it is rule of ignorant poors. And he says that polity, which is another form of democracy, is best practicable form of government. He does not say it is best, but he says it is best practicable. Right? Then I will mention Machiavelli. Right? What Machiavelli says that in his book Discourses, always remember, in his book Discourses, he mentions that if people are virtuous, if people are virtuous, democracy can be attempted. Right? If people are virtuous, again, link this to constitutionalism. Right? Link this with constitutionalism. Then we can see Bentham. Bentham, in his book Lectures on Jurisprudence, he is a radical Democrat. He does not, if you remember his GHGN principle, if you remember his specific calculus, he says that persons don't differ in quality. Your pleasure, my pleasure, everyone's pleasure is the same. Everyone's pleasure is the same, and Pushpin is as good as poetry. Right? What Bentham says, it is a opposite view of other people. Bentham says that persons don't matter. He says that constitutionalism need not matter. What matters according to Bentham is there should be universal adult franchisee. Right? Universal adult franchise. Don't worry, I will explain the whole thing. I will explain the whole thing. Then there is Mill. Then there is Mill. Mill is both idealist and he is utilitarian as well. Mill, in his book on representative government or representative democracy, I don't remember in certain, I don't remember certainly, but it is something like that. So Mill, in his book on representative government or representative democracy, he says that democracy is for places where people are rational, where people are rational. And he says that for barbarians, benevolent despotism is the best form of government. Right? This is how I will write this answer. Right? Not like this. Right? I am just dumping all the scholars all at once, but right, in a similar way. In a similar way. But I might not mention all these scholars, but I will give some of my views. But this is how I will go about it. So, is democracy is democracy can democracies be success without constitutionalism? Is constitutionalism necessary for success of democracy? Plato says Plato says democracy is bad. Right? He discards democracy altogether, and he says democracy is worst form of government. Aristotle, while accepting some form of democracy, right, being a scholar of golden mean, Aristotle says that democracy is worst, but another form of democracy, which is polity, is best practicable. Machiavelli says in his book Discourses, we are not reading Prince but Discourses. In his book Prince, he says that if people are virtuous, democracy can be attempted. Bentham, on the other hand, is radical Democrat. Right? He suggests there should be universal adult franchise, and he says that persons don't differ in quality. Right? Why? What do I mean by quality? Constitutionalism. Persons don't differ in quality. Their constitutionalism may or may not exist, but there should be universal adult franchise. There should be democracy for all. Mill is both idealist and utilitarian. He says that democracy can be given. Democracy is not a free gift to be distributed. If people are virtuous, democracy is a good form of government, but democracy is not for colonies. Right? Democracy is not for colonies. But this, but the debate, as we were seeing, right? Some people say that people differ in values, people differ in virtues. Some people say they don't. Right? Mostly people differ in virtues. Only Bentham says that they don't differ in virtues, and universal adult franchise, uh, universal voting rights can be extended to everyone. Can be extended to everyone. Right? So, what is the debate? Is constitutionalism needed for the success of democracy? Some people say yes, some people say no. Only Bentham says no, rest of the people say yes. This idea, this idea that this question, that if constitutionalism is needed for success of democracy, was was explored by two very important people. One is Lee Kuan Yew, and the other is Amartya Sen. Right? I will give you some background. Who was Lee Kuan Yew and who was Amartya Sen? So Lee Kuan Yew is the, I will say, he's the father of modern Singapore. Singapore was just a port. It was not as flashy, as developed as it was uh, as it is today, right? And Singapore saw unprecedented level of development within a very short period of time, right? And why it saw a lot of development within a short period of time? This was answered by Lee Kuan Yew, and he says that democracy is not needed. What is needed is discipline, right? For Lee Kuan Yew, Singapore, Singapore developed due to discipline, not democracy, right? Discipline, not democracy. For Lee Kuan Yew, democracy, autonomy of self, these are these are incompatible with Asian values. What are Asian values? We have seen in Asian values debate, whereby Asian values derive from Confucianism. Confucianism basically talks about duty, discipline, right? Respect, all those things. So, Asian values do not are not compatible with the democracy and substantive values of democracy, right? And for this, for rejection of democracy in Asian milieu, in Asian socio-economic context, two people wrote a monumental document in form of Bangkok Declaration, right? Bangkok Declaration by Mahathir Mohamad of Indonesia and Lee Kuan Yew. Lee Kuan Yew. They both are not for democracy. They both think democracy will not lead us to anywhere, and they both say what we should do is emulate China's authoritarian model for for quick growth. So they are fanboys of Chinese model, right? They don't think Indian model will lead to development. They think Indian model will lead to red tape and slowing of development, right? Slowing of development. So what Lee Kuan Yew basically wants to say that democracy is not suitable for development. Democracy is not suitable in Asian socio-economic context. What Lee Kuan Yew wants to say that democracy is not really needed in Asia, right? So for to counter a perspective of Asian person, we of course we needed someone Asian, and and while Lee Kuan Yew and Mahathir Mohamad reject democracy, right, by saying that democracy cannot lead to development, democracy cannot lead to development. Amartya Sen on the other hand, right, Amartya Sen on the other hand start his book Development as Freedom by saying, by quoting, people are not made fit for democracy, rather they should be made fit through democracy. Amartya Sen, right? People people are not to be made fit for democracy, but they should be made fit through democracy, right? So democracy is not a burden on development, it is not a blockage for development, it is actually a aid, right? So Amartya Sen, in explaining position of India in his book Development as Freedom says that democracy is not the reason so as to why India is not developed, right? Democracy is not the reason so as to why India is developing and China has developed, has developed. Why there is gap between India and China? This was explained by Sen. This was explained by Sen by saying that India lacked leadership. That is why India is undeveloped. The general lack of leadership in Indian democracy was the reason why India could not develop easily, right? So it is not really the China or Chinese model of government which succeeded. It was leadership which succeeded. India did not have such leadership, right? Then he suggests that Lee Kuan Yew tries to justify Asia as a singular entity, right? This was view of Lee Kuan Yew. Asia as a singular entity, and what what Lee Kuan Yew tries to say that Asian values are are common across the Asia. But is it true? Do you think China and Japan have similar values? Do you think Japan and India have similar values? Do you even think India and Pakistan have similar values? No, no. In every state, socio-economic situation is different. In every state, type of people are different, right? So Asian values is not a singular thing. Confucianism is not the value which whole of Asia follows. And he suggests that democracy and development has no direct correlation, which Lee Kuan Yew suggests there is a direct connection. Lee Kuan Yew suggests for development we need discipline. For development we need a strong central state. For Sen, it is not true. For development, it is not really needed that what type of government exists. It is not really required, right? For development, there can be a different kind of government, and it can work if the leadership is strong enough, right? And to to justify in democracy in India, he wants to say that India never faced famines, right? India never faced famines, but China did, right? China did. Why did China face famine? Right? You remember Great Leap Forward. You remember Cultural Revolution, right? Great Leap Forward led to death of around 10 million people. Why? Because because Mao had a fanatical idea of saying that stop with agriculture, just start with production of steel. So there was sudden drop in agricultural output. People had nothing to eat, and around 10 million people died. Right? 10 million people did not even die after World War II. Right? That is how humongous this number is. After World War II, around 1.2, 1.3 million people died, but only in Great Leap Forward, around 10 million people died. Still, Mao is held as some sort of saint in China. Right? I don't know what is going on there, but it is what it is. Right? Right? He says, Amartya Sen says that India had never faced famines, but China did. Right? China had suffered greatly forward. India did not. Why? Because there was feedback system. There was feedback system. What is the feedback system? Elections, right? Indira Gandhi had to go to USA, ask for greens. She had to. If because if she did not, she would have lost election. No question asked. If she did not, she would have absolutely lost elections. If Green Revolution did not happen, she would have lost a lot of elections. Those things happened. That is why she was in power for a long time. Why? Because she wanted to be in power, and power was in India is only through elections. Elections are a great feedback system, right? Another feedback system is freedom of speech and expression. Against government policies, we can at least speak. After speaking, what will happen is not in our hands, but we can at least speak, right? We can at least speak, right? In India, COVID-19 situation did not get out of hands. In India, tariff or thus we are at a very strong position with respect to economy because there is constant feedback which goes on in government. Right? Government has its eyes on the ground. It knows what will work and what will not work. China at the time did not have this. That is why China faced famines and India did not, because in democracy you will find feedback system, right? Feedback system. So he suggests, Amartya Sen suggests that that constitutionalism is not needed for democracy. Constitutionalism is not needed for democracy, but democracy should lead to constitutionalism. And he says that people are not made fit for democracy, but fit through democracy. That is the idea. Right? How beautifully he has connected all this. Why democracy is needed? Because feedback system. Even though there is not much development, without leadership there cannot be development. But people will not die hungry because there is constant feedback. In China, 10 million people died. In India, we did not face famine. Even if we did face famine, there was the death toll was not so severe. The death toll was not so severe, right? And the last concept we have to see before finishing this lecture, right? 10 minutes. I need 10 more minutes. And the last concept we have to see is exceptionalism. I hope you understood prerequisites of democracy if constitutionalism is needed to precede democracy. Right? Right. What it wants to say, that need people be virtuous for success of democracy. There were we have seen a lot of scholars. Then we have seen Lee Kuan Yew versus Sen debate. Right? Some scholars say that virtuous people are needed, constitutionalism is needed. Some scholars say that it is not needed. Right? Only Bentham says it is not needed. Rest of the scholars says it is needed. Then we shift to Lee Kuan Yew versus Amartya Sen debate, whereby Amartya Sen says that people need to be virtuous. There need to be discipline for development. And he does not specifically speak about democracy, but he rejects democracy and he says that discipline is needed for development. What you say, authoritarianism is needed for development. Confucian values, Asian values are needed for development. Amartya Sen says that no, for development you need leadership. Democracy is not hindrance, is not a is not a blockage in development. Democracy is actually aiding development. Democracy uh, is is actually a good thing. That is why in India there were no famines. In China, you have, because of famine, 10 million people died. Why? Because there was constant feedback. As there was constant feedback of elections, of there was freedom of speech and expression, the leadership of India was fearful that if they do not feed the people, they will lose next election. Nobody wants to lose power. Nobody wants to lose power. So there was constant public action whenever people got agitated. Right? Whenever people got agitated. This is the idea. Does 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 constitutionalism is constitutional needed for democracy? Some people will say yes, some people will say no. Lee View, Lee and rest of the scholars say people need to be virtuous. Amartya Sen and Bentham says no. Both of them says that give democracy first, give universal adult franchise first, then we will see what will happen with democracy. Right? The last thing we have to study, because it is very much related to constitutionalism and democracy, we have to see we have to see the concept of Arab exceptionalism. Arab exceptionalism. What is Arab countries of Arabian Peninsula? People of Arabian Peninsula, Saudi, UAE, Oman, Kuwait, right? Yemen, all those countries, right? Exceptionalism. What is exceptionalism? Exceptionalism is exception. Exception with respect to what? Exception with respect to democracy. What is Arab exceptionalism? Exception with respect to democracy. Right? What Western scholars say with respect to Arab exceptionalism, it means that Arab people are exceptional to democracy. I will explain this in a very simple language. Right? Exception to democracy, Arab world is exception to democracy. It means that democracy has has chance of success success everywhere except Arab world, right? Except Arab world. Democracy has chance of success everywhere except Arab world, and Western scholars say that why there is no chance of success in Arab world, because Islam is not compatible with democracy, right? The religion, which talks, which is classless, the religion which talks about universal brotherhood, right? Right, I don't want to have any heat for this, but I am just justifying Arab exceptionalism, why Arab exceptionalism is wrong, right? So the natural Islam is naturally democratic, right? We can interpret it that way. Islam can be naturally democratic, right? The real situation is very different, right? In most of the Islam and Islamic world has authoritarian regimes, but still it can be democratic. So, what Arab exceptionalism wants to say, that democracy has chance of success everywhere except Arab world, and Western scholars say that Islam is not compatible with democracy. Right? Islam is not incompatible with this democracy. Why it is not incompatible with it is not compatible with democracy? Because in Islam it is suggested that you have to follow only only divine rules, right? There is Quran, there is Sharia law. Western scholars say that Quran and Sharia law are not compatible with democracy, are not compatible with autonomy of self. Hence hence Western countries suggest suggest theocracy led by hereditary monarchs or guided democracy, right? Very multiple keywords have come all at once. I will explain it, don't worry, right? Theocracy led by hereditary democracy or guided democracy, right? What is it? Theocracy, right? What Arab exceptionalism, I hope you understood that democracy has chance of success everywhere except Arab world. Why it has no chance of success in Arab world? Because Islam is not compatible with democracy, right? Why Islam is not compatible with democracy? Because Muslims have to follow only divine rules in form of Quran and Sharia. Hence, Western countries suggest that theocracies led by hereditary monarchs or guided democracies are way to go in Arab world, right? For example, Tunisia, Libya, everywhere, Egypt, everywhere, US tried to do the same. What is theocracy? What is hereditary monarch? What is guided democracy? I will explain in a small, in a brief. Right? Theocracy, two words, etymological approach. Theocratic, theocratic, archy. What is theocratic? Theocratic is basically uh, religious leaders. Rule of religious leaders is theocracy. Hereditary monarchs are hereditary and monarchy. As simple as that, right? Saudi Arabia, right? Saudi Arabia has hereditary monarchy. Guided democracy is puppet regimes, right? There is going to be a puppet, the strings of which will be controlled by USA. This is puppet regimes, right? The puppet will be controlled by USA. That is the idea. So, what Western scholars says about Arab exceptionalism? That what is Arab exceptionalism? Basically, it is basically saying that democracy has chance of success everywhere except Arab world. Why? Because Islam is not compatible with democracy, and what we need is theocracy led by hereditary monarchy or guided democracies or puppet regimes, right? But the view of Arab exceptionalism, that the view of Arab exceptionalism that Arab world cannot be cannot align with democracy was criticized by post-colonial scholars. post-colonial scholars. In simple words, and I don't want, I have to be as frank as possible with this. Post-colonial scholars say Arab exceptionalism is bullshit. It is absolute bullshit, right? It is absolute bullshit. Why it is absolute bullshit? Because Western countries are eyeing hegemony in in Arab world. Western countries need hegemony in Western world, right? Why they need hegemony? Because oil, because trade routes, because oil and because trade routes. I will make a small map of Arabian Peninsula. You will realize what I'm saying, right? Uh, Sorry. So uh, this is a very preliminary map of Arabian Peninsula, right? This is how Arabian Peninsula is more or less, and and uh, and this is Africa as well. Something like this, right? Arabian Peninsula, there is oil everywhere. There is oil in Arabian Peninsula. In North Africa, there is oil. The second thing is trade choke points. Strait of Hormuz, Bab al Mandab, right? These two choke points are there. If you control these two straits, you basically control world trade. So why the US or the Western countries need hegemony in Arabian Peninsula? Because number one, they need oil. Number two, they need control on trade routes. They need control on Bab al Mandab. They need control on Strait of Hormuz. Right? Control on trade routes. So Arab exceptionalism, it is not a real theory. It is just an instrument of hegemony. This is what post-colonial scholars are trying to say. Islam is Islam is very much compatible with democracy, as we have seen in Iran. Iran is a theocratic democracy. There is democracy in Iran, right? The Arab Spring also happened. Arab Spring happened because there was democracy. There was a call for democracy in all of the Arab world. Arab people wanted democracy, right? Arab people wanted democracy. And post-colonial scholars say that the idea that Islam is not compatible with democracy is false. This is post-colonial scholars say, right? They say procedurally, is Islam against elections? Islam is not, so it is compatible. Substantively, is Islam against equality? Is Islam against fraternity? It is not. Right? This is post-colonial scholars saying. Right? For this, post-colonial scholar give example of Loya Jirga tribal assemblies in Afghanistan. Loya Jirga were tribal assemblies in Afghanistan. They were largely democratic. Right? Also, I can think of other example of third world which is largely democratic, of course, from Arab world. Uh, there is not not I don't remember any other. So yeah. So what post-colonial scholars say that Arab exceptionalism is just an discourse. Remember Foucault, right? I hope this helped. I hope this helped. We have started with We have started with democracy. We have done with what is democracy, what are the perspectives on democracy, what is needed for democracy to succeed. That also we have seen, and what is Arab exceptionalism with respect to democracy. It is essentially a concept of international relations, still applicable to this topic. That is why I explained it. And Arab exceptionalism you can write in the other question of, is democracy, is constitutionalism needed, needed for democracy to succeed. I hope this helped. This was a really long lecture. I hope this helped, and thank you so much. I will continue from the next lecture, and we'll start with representative democracy. We will start with models of democracy, starting with not representative democracy but participatory democracy. Representative democracy is the next step in evolution. I hope this helped. Thank you so much. Bye.